Back-to-back bombshell reports further expose the corruption of the United States Supreme Court, with one conservative justice receiving $4 million in disclosed and undisclosed gifts, and the recording of a second conservative justice saying that the United States needs to return to a place of godliness, that there are fundamental differences with the left which can't be compromised, and how in the end, one side or the other is going to win. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at here in this video. Some of them are video and some of them are purely audio. And we're actually going to start with those first because in many ways, those are the most terrifying and they're also the most recent. Justice Samuel Alito, who's appointed by George W. Bush, is in many ways the most shamelessly and openly partisan of the justices, even more so than the other guy who we're going to talk about here in a minute, Clarence Thomas. I want to play you some audio of a conversation between Scalia and a liberal reporter named Lauren Windsor, who posed basically as a conservative fangirl of Justice Alito at a recent dinner in which Alito was present. Here's some of the things that Alito said or agreed with during this conversation.
As a Catholic and as someone who really cherishes my faith, I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. And one side or the other is going to win. It's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. So it's not like we're going to split the difference.
People in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that to return our country to a place of godliness.
Oh, I agree with you.
Folks, this is genuinely unhinged stuff from a United States Supreme Court justice, someone who is not supposed to be politically partisan and biased in the way that we expect from typical politicians. Those words from Alito are no different from any elected representative, except we didn't elect Alito and we can't re-elect him or recall him. Truly dangerous stuff. Rolling Stone goes into more detail about this bombshell report. Justice Alito caught on tape discussing how Battle for America can't be compromised. In a new secret recording, the Supreme Court justice says he agrees that the U.S. should return to a place of godliness. Alito made these comments in remarks in conversation at the Supreme Court Historical Society's annual dinner on June 3rd, a function that's known to right-wing activists as an opportunity to buttonhole Supreme Court justices. His comments were recorded by Lauren Windsor, a liberal documentary filmmaker. Windsor attended the dinner as a dues-paying member of the society under her real name, along with a colleague. She asked questions of the justice as though she were a religious conservative. The justice's unguarded comments highlight the degree to which Alito makes little effort to present himself as a neutral umpire calling judicial balls and strikes, but rather as a partisan member of a hard-right judicial faction that's empowered to make life-altering decisions for every American. The recording, which was provided exclusively to Rolling Stone, captures Windsor approaching Alito at the event and reminding him that they spoke at the same function the year before, when she asked him a question about political polarization. In the intervening year, she tells the justice her views on the matter had changed. Quote, I don't know what we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. Windsor says, I think it's a matter of winning. I think you're probably right, Alito replies, on one side or the other. One side or the other is going to win. You should read the rest of the article. It's very fascinating stuff, a remarkable expose, a damning expose of how far this once venerable institution has fallen into just open partisanship. But before I dive into, again, my thoughts on the Supreme Court in general, I also want to remind you of another major bombshell report about the United States Supreme Court, particularly with respect to Clarence Thomas, another far-right member of the court who has been the subject of multiple ethics reports and ethics violations, quite frankly, and in many ways is financially the most corrupt member of the institution.
New data out today from Fix the Court takes a look at the value of gifts to justices over the past 20 years, both disclosed and then undisclosed gifts that were subsequently reported out. To take you through just a handful that will give you a sense, Justice Elena Kagan's calculated to have received gifts valued at just under $1,200. That's over 20 years. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg over $59,000. Again, over 20 years, $3,000 a year. Now, Justice Samuel Alito taking quite a bit more, $170,000 over 20 years. But none of that is in the zip code of the ballpark of Justice Clarence Thomas, whose gifts totaled over $4 million. To give you a sense of how that looks in chart form, take a look. Can you see where Justice Thomas is on that bar chart? The big red bar on the left? That's Clarence Thomas compared to all the other justices who served during this time.
Folks, that is a staggering sum, just by any objective measure, and certainly compared to his other peers over a 20-year spread, $4 million. Steve Ratner points out one of these justices is not like the other, CC at Fix the Court. We're going to go into, let me do this. I also want to point out, because I say this, and yet there's another scandal surrounding Alito as well. So you have this recent hot mic situation with Alito. You have Clarence Thomas and his financial corruption. All right. And you also have the flag situation that we discussed a few weeks ago about Justice Alito as well. And this is important, too, because there was an update in that respect. Alito's explanation for the insurrectionist symbol, this comes from Vanity Fair, by the way, outside his Virginia home in 2021, already strained credulity. Then a New York Times report published Tuesday torpedoed it even more, revealing that the neighborhood spat the justice says inspired his wife to unfurl an upside-down American flag seemed to have occurred well after it had been raised and taken down. The flag was seen outside the Alito residence in a photograph dated January 17th, 2021, so 11 days after the insurrection, and was displayed for several days, according to neighbors. But the argument the Supreme Court conservative said prompted his wife, Martha Ann Alito, to hoist the flag didn't happen until February 15th of that year, according to a call the liberal couple involved in the dispute made to the police. And the neighbor in question recently went on CNN to explain the discrepancies in the timeline.
But just to be very clear on the timing, he's saying that she put up the flag because you said those things. But when we look at, there was actually, you called 911 on that day. There's actually a police report about that incident. And that shows that the timing just doesn't work, right? The flag was up before. The flag picture that the New York Times had was weeks before that incident actually happened, where you called her that word. So what he's saying here, you're saying at best mistaken, but it certainly is it's categorically by the dates not true, right? She didn't put the flag up for that reason.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's what I want to really drive home to people, is that this happened on February 15th. And we know that because they had been harassing us so long that we were like, we need a paper trail of this. Like, we better call the cops right now.
So there you have it, folks. An incontrovertible discrepancy in the timeline offered by Alito to try to justify why his residence had a flag associated with an insurrectionist movement. This is truly scary and despicable stuff. And by the way, some people might say, well, it's a case of he said, she said, right? The neighbor says one thing, Alito says the other. No one is under any obligation to give Alito the benefit of the doubt, okay? Especially when, according to the neighbor, the timeline doesn't add up. Alito needs to be the one who should provide corroborating proof, given that it's his impartiality that matters more. He is one of 9 unelected high priests, effectively, who get to dictate terms to the rest of the country, the other 2 branches. It's his integrity and his impartiality that needs to be proven beyond reproach. I want to play a couple of clips here, too. One from one of my favorite Supreme Court reform activists, Elie Mystal, who just very bluntly lays out the situation about Alito's integrity and about what Congress is doing or not doing to rectify it.
Yeah, so once again, we caught Clarence Thomas in a lie, because when these allegations, when these gifts first came out, were first reported by ProPublica, Thomas said that he was not required to report them on his disclosure form. Now he's saying not reporting them was an inadvertent omission. Well, which one is it, Clarence? And frankly, it doesn't matter which one it is, because there will be no punishment. And so while we can talk about all of these gifts, the $2.4 million, the money that he is raking in, the important thing to remember is that Congress refuses to do anything to stop these people. Congress will not pass ethics legislation. I do not know why Republicans in Congress oppose minimal basic ethics requirements for the Supreme Court, but they do, and so we don't have them, and so nothing, squadoosh, is the number that is going to happen in terms of consequences for Clarence Thomas's corruption and lies.
Yeah, I should say there, I'm sorry that Mastal was referring specifically to Clarence Thomas and the $4 million sum here, but it also applies to Alito as well. It applies to both of them, which is they feel that they can act with impunity because there are no meaningful consequences to them violating what is otherwise just a norm, right? Back in November of 2023, after months of public pressure from Democrats in the Senate, Chief Justice Roberts authored this Supreme Court Code of Conduct as kind of a bone to be thrown. But there's no enforcement mechanism. And we've seen time and time again that the conservative justices in particular violate it without consequence. Okay? So it's so bewildering, except the part where this is where I disagree with Elie Mystal. What's not bewildering is why Republicans aren't doing anything about it. Well, why would they? This court has a 6-3 conservative supermajority, which reliably delivers them the results that they want. Not always. Not always. My friend Pisco were in here. He'd say, Josiah, even this conservative Supreme Court doesn't always give Republicans what they want. That's true. But on the big ticket items, on the things that matter most, and in the aggregate, they do. So it's one of those things where if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas the rest of us want to impose these ethics requirements on every justice, including the liberal or progressive justices as well. Norm Eisen, a CNN analyst, responds to this report about Thomas and reminds people that Congress absolutely has the right to impose ethics requirements on the United States Supreme Court.
Wrong, Anderson. It's contrary to the fundamental American idea that our nation was founded on. We didn't want certain individuals like King George III, who we overthrew, to be above the law. Judges are subject to checks and balances and to federal law like anybody else. No wonder the Supreme Court is in an ethics crisis. The combination of these enormous amounts of luxury travel by Justice Thomas, also involving Justice Alito, the second largest recipient of gifts over that same period of time, and their spouses' conduct that raises questions about their ability to sit on cases. They should have recused from those cases. When I was the ethics czar in the White House, I wouldn't allow, even if the rules permitted it, I wouldn't allow White House staff to take these kinds of luxury vacations because of the appearance it creates of exploiting official action. The givers of these gifts have ideological or business issues before the court. It's absolutely outrageous and unacceptable. And Justice Alito is not above the law.
He's not. I mean, actually, in some ways, he must be, right? Because it doesn't matter if principally he's not. If there's no enforcement mechanism to hold him accountable when he violates ethics or the law, then yes, he is effectively above it. Folks, the Supreme Court and Supreme Court reform is something which really is important to me, and it should be important to everyone because, again, we do have a system of checks and balances, which is supposed to work every which way. The president has the veto. That's a check against Congress, okay? That means the president can influence and frustrate Congress. He has power over Congress. But Congress can also override the veto. It's rare, but it happens. It's a way to override the president. Congress can also impeach the president, okay, and sets the budget for the executive branch, right? Congress, by the way, is supposed to be the supreme branch. It's supposed to be the branch with the most checks to impose on the other two and the fewest checks against it, right? That's why it's listed first, Article 1. As the founding fathers say, in a democratic republic, the legislature must necessarily be predominant, okay? even though Congress tends to forget it. The Supreme Court, in contrast, was always intended to be the weakest of the branches, the least powerful. They don't create the law. They don't have the power of the purse, which all of which Congress has, nor do they have the power of the, quote, sword, which is what the president has. The Supreme Court's important, but it was never supposed to be equal or let alone dominant over the other two branches. And yet it clearly sees itself as a branch which can impose checks. It can shut down, strike down the president's executive orders. It can strike down congressional law. But if you want to impose ethics requirements on them, ethics requirements, which, by the way, exist for the other two branches, if you want to actually do that, you can't. They get to be 9 unelected philosopher kings who serve for life, aren't elected, not subject to recall, mandatory retirement ages, anything like that. And they can impose their will on everybody else, and you can't do anything to them. And if you question their integrity, they say, just trust us, and you shouldn't be questioning us in the first place. No, that is untenable. I believe that Democrats should make a very strong case to the American people. Listen, these are 9 dictators or wannabe dictators, or at least some of the 9, and there's potential abuse from all 9, and we can't permit that. No other country and no other state in the United States, except for Rhode Island, does it the way the federal government does. 49 out of 50 states do it differently. They have checks against their high courts. Every other advanced democracy on earth also does it differently. They don't give their Supreme Court blank checks to rule the rest of us. No. Super gross, despicable stuff from the United States Supreme Court, in particular, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And I think it should be a premier issue in the upcoming election. Let me know what you think in the comments.